a lot of plays on offense, and they're high scoring. And he had high red zone usage last season. And it looked like in the the preseason, looked like they were just bringing him all around the formation, trying to get him involved wherever they could. So all signs pointed to him being great. So the only takeaway I can make from this one is rankings versus reality, and that's not even a rankings issue. I think the ranking was fine, maybe a little bit aggressive, but he should have been like a mid to low end wide receiver 2, and I would rank him there again looking back if I had the chance. The issue is there was no need to draft him. There were so many wide receivers mid and late that were going to put up similar, if not more production, that like there was just no need to spend an early round pick on Hogan. You should have been using that pick on running backs, essentially. So that's the only takeaway is, yes, look at rankings. Yes, use rankings. But, I mean, I rarely drafted Hogan, if I even did draft Hogan in any leagues, just because you have to target running backs early. So that's the takeaway from that one. I shift to Robert Woods in this one because I want to highlight why the thinking behind Hogan wasn't wrong. Woods is the exact same thing as Hogan. He was a starting wide receiver on a high volume offense that was going to have red zone usage. I ranked him as a wide receiver 38. That was definitely too low, for sure too low. Finished as wide receiver 11, and while that was more in the higher end of variance, I was 4 spots below ECR, and even ECR was way too low. He should have been definitely into the 20s because of how they run their offense. You know, the Rams run almost always a wide receiver, 3 wide receiver sets, and they rarely sub. You know, these guys play like 99 to 100% of snaps every single week, so he's always on the field. So if I liked Hogan as much as I did at wide receiver 17, why am I putting Woods at wide receiver 38? When they're both on a great offense, they're both going to have red zone usage. It just both have good quarterbacks. Hogan had the better quarterback, but you see my point is that although this was the higher end of variance, there was definitely reason to believe that Woods was going to have a perfectly good year. Does he finish at wide receiver 11 most of the time? No. I mean, Gurley and Kupp's injuries don't happen all the time, and Kupp was a major part of that offense before he went out. But regardless, he was going to have a good year. So maybe he finishes more like the wide receiver 15, 16 sometimes, but he should have been ranked definitely above where I had him. DAVANTE Adams, probably one of my biggest misses and the biggest misses of the community. I got a lot of heat for ranking him at 8. That was only one below where ECR had him at 7. He finished as wide receiver 2, and my thinking to start the season was that I hate spending a high pick on a touchdown-dependent wide receiver. And he'd proven throughout his entire career that he was dependent on touchdowns. He wasn't going to do anything really outside of that. The issue is that opportunity is king. And I say that all the time in the offseason. Opportunity is what we're targeting. And when you look at that offense, yes, Jordy, like last season, so not like the one that just happened, but the one before that, Jordy wasn't really used at all. And we thought going into the season that Cobb was kind of going to be like fizzled out this year. So if we think both of those things, like the ball has to go somewhere. You know, Rodgers, even if their defense was better than it was, and even if they were, you know, not losing so many games, they were still going to throw the ball a ton. They're just a pass-first team, and they're especially pass-first when they get close to the goal line. So he proved this season that he is an elite wide receiver, has a massive red zone role on a team that's going to score a ton of points. So in reality, he's in that same tier as Julio, Odell, and Tyreek. He should have been ranked in that tier. So he probably should have been like the wide receiver 6, I would say, would be a more fair ranking. Maybe wide receiver 5 going into the season. But I can definitely see people having him as like a wide receiver 3 or 4. Not wide receiver 3 or 4, but the 3rd or 4th overall wide receiver in draft this coming season. And he was definitely worth his ADP this past season. Just also want to point out quickly, if he does rise into that like wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 range, remember, I still always lean running back early. So I would still be taking the high-end running backs, even knowing how dominant he can be. It's still running back first early on, no matter what the format. 4th guy, Marquise Goodwin. This one I almost didn't want to put on here because I had him ranked below ADP and below ECR. So, if you look at the rankings, you wouldn't have drafted him. But I still did put out videos saying I really liked him. Some of those videos were when he was like in the 10th round, and then he kind of climbed up. So wide receiver 31 is around, like a 7th round? Yeah, 7th round ranking. Put that at the bottom. This one is a lesson in hype and risk. He looked really good at the end of 2017. We know that Garoppolo looked really good at the end of 2017, and he looked really good in the preseason. Garoppolo was throwing the ball to him a ton. Everything looked great. But that was a small sample size, and when people started extrapolating, like a 5-game sample of a full season, there's a lot of variance in a single season of football. Like, take an entire season, there's massive variance. If you want to know how good a guy is, you got to take like a 7-year sample. There's just not enough data points for you to look at one season and know how good someone is. So for us to look at a 5-game sample and think we know how good someone is and how good they're going to be in an offense is crazy. So in the 7th round, it's just not worth taking a stance on. And that's, I think, what a big takeaway is, and what I want to keep in the back of our minds going into next year is that we need to pick and choose our battles. Like, I really liked his talent. He's an Olympic athlete, going to have a great quarterback. He was a really good route runner when we saw in the preseason, so we started falling in love with him. And as ADP rises, at some point, it's just not worth the risk. There's a risk that Jimmy Garoppolo isn't as good as we think. There was a risk that he wasn't as good as we thought. And there was a risk that offense wasn't going to be overall as good as we thought. So why continue drafting a guy in the middle rounds when you could have spent a late round pick on Galladay and Godwin and Lockett, who we knew for a fact would crush this season? I mean, we were adamant that you needed to try and get all of them on all of your teams, but at least get 2 of them on your teams. So if we love those guys so much, just why? Why take Goodwin? Just take another shot at the running back position that's so important to hit on, or take a tight end. I didn't love taking early tight ends last season, but that was because there were some guys in the mid and late range that were going to be just as good. And I believe you probably still couldn't have gotten Ertz in I don't remember where Ertz was going. You couldn't have gotten him in the 7th round. You could have easily gotten Kittle. You could have gotten Njoku. There are a few guys you could have easily gotten in the middle rounds that you just didn't have to spend picks on a wide receiver that, what is the real upside with a guy like Goodwin? He's not a possession receiver. He's a deep threat. And they did have other weapons on the team. So that's my bad for pushing him a little bit too much. But also, I want to point out, you guys need to look at rankings, because a video can tell you how much I like someone, but when I rank him as wide receiver 31, don't be drafting him in the 5th round, because that's a 7th round grade. So just pointing that out. So last guy is Adam Thielen. And I guess I thought that the Vikings would not be dreadful on defense. They were dreadful. I did not think he would finish 6th in targets. But we also needed to look at who was on that offense. So I looked at the offense and I said, we like Diggs, we like Rudolph, we like Cook, we like Thielen. They're all really good players, and they're all going to get volume. And I didn't think that offense overall was going to have as much volume as it did, because I thought that the team would be better. I thought, they'd make the playoffs. But they were a lot worse than we thought. And that obviously benefits skill position wide receivers. I mean, really, it just benefits the wide receiver when your team's not as good. Or at least on defense, because then your offense gets to play more. So I didn't expect that kind of volume. If we played the season out, a million times, he finishes as the wide receiver 10 a little bit more often. Because I want to point out the tale of 2 seasons with Adam Thielen. And it really, neither of them were what I expected. I did not expect him to be over 15 fantasy points, easily over 15 fantasy points in 8 straight games to start the season. He had that incredible stretch of 100 yards and a touchdown, had the incredible stretch of just 100 yards. I didn't expect that. But I also didn't expect the second half of the season, when he had just 1 game over 15 fantasy points over his last 8 weeks, and finishes essentially a high-end wide receiver 3 over the second half, including 9.6 points per game in the fantasy playoffs. he was not good in the second half of the season, and he was essentially, at some points, you didn't have to start him at all, which I didn't expect. I expected the entire season to be somewhere in the middle. So should he have been wide receiver 15? No. He probably should have been ranked more as like the wide receiver 11, 12 kind of range, like a low-end wide receiver 1. But also just remember, the season didn't finish like it started for Adam Thielen. And is some of that due to Dalvin Cook returning in the second half of the season? Maybe. So just keep it in mind. If you look at the end of season number, it's amazing. You look at the start of the season, it's amazing. But if you owned Adam Thielen, you remember this back half of the season where you could have played Lockett, Godwin, Golladay instead and been just as fine. So I didn't expect either of those beginning or starts, but it was just a wrong ranking. He finished as wide receiver 7. I had him wide receiver 15. That is incorrect. So that's the end of this one. I hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, how about we hit that like button? How about we subscribe if we're new? Thanks for watching.